My dream dog turned into a snarling nightmare, tearing my relationship apart. Can a mysterious behaviorist tame the beast within him and save us from chaos? The day we brought Buster home is carved into my mind like a snapshot I'll never lose. His tiny paws tapped a quick rhythm across the hardwood floor of our small apartment, leaving faint echoes in the quiet space. His ice blue eyes glimmered with a spark of wonder, wide and bright as he took in every corner of his new world. That fluffy tail of his wagged like a metronome set to pure joy, a blur of white against his thick fur. I turned to Jake, my boyfriend, standing beside me with his hands stuffed in his pockets, and caught the same wide grin spreading across his face that I felt blooming in my chest. We'd spent months tossing around the idea of a dog. Late-night talks over takeout, scrolling shelter websites, imagining what it'd be like. When we saw Buster at the shelter, curled up in a kennel with his head tilted just so, it wasn't a question anymore. He was ours. Like some quiet twist of fate had led us straight to him. That little Siberian Husky pup turned our one-bedroom place into something alive, something buzzing. The first weeks were a whirlwind of sloppy puppy kisses and bursts of energy that seemed to bounce off the walls. I'd plop down on the floor after work, still in my jeans and sneakers, and just watch him explore. He'd pounce on his own shadow, skidding into the coffee table with a thud, or stare at his reflection in the full-length mirror by the door, yipping like he'd met a new friend. I'd laugh until my sides ached, the sound mixing with the clatter of his nails on the floor. Jake and I took turns stumbling out of bed for those bleary, middle-of-the-night potty runs, the cold air biting at our bare feet as we shuffled down the hall. Mornings after, we'd lean against the kitchen counter, sipping coffee from chipped mugs, sharing sleepy smiles that said we were in this together. Tired, sure, but happy, bone-deep happy. We carved out a special spot for him in the living room, tucked beside the couch. A soft bed with a chewed-up edge, a scattered pile of toys, squeaky balls and a frayed rope, and a blanket we'd picked up from the shelter, still carrying the faint scent of his littermates to help him settle. Training in those early days felt more like a game than a chore. Buster would drop into a sit for a treat, his little butt hitting the floor for half a second before he'd spring back up, too wound up to stay still. His eyes would lock on the bit of chicken in my hand, tail whipping the air, and we'd laugh it off, figuring his enthusiasm was just part of what made him special. Jake would hoist him up in his arms, Buster's legs dangling, tongue lolling, to carry him down the 3 flights of stairs to the patchy strip of grass behind our building. "Good boy," he'd call out, voice bright with praise when Buster squatted and did his business outside. We'd high-five like we'd won something big, proud of every little step. Our friends couldn't get enough of him either. They'd pile into our place on weekends, turning every visit into a Buster fan club meeting. "Look at that face," they'd say, cooing over the black and white markings that framed his eyes like a perfect mask. "He's gonna be a stunner," someone would add, and Jake and I would puff up, grinning like we'd birthed him ourselves. Movie nights became our little ritual. Buster would wedge himself between us on the couch, his warm, solid weight pressing into my side as the TV flickered. His fur smelled faintly of the lavender shampoo we'd used after his first bath, and I'd run my fingers through it, feeling the softness against my skin. Sometimes he'd dream, his paws twitching like he was racing through a field, chasing rabbits or squirrels only he could see. We'd hit pause on whatever old comedy was playing just to watch him, his tiny whimpers, the way his nose wrinkled. "He's too cute," Jake would whisper, and I'd nod, my heart so full it almost hurt. Even the hiccups of those days, the chewed shoelace I found under the table, the damp spot on the carpet we'd scrub with sighs, felt like small, sweet trades for having him. Jake started joking about framing the evidence. A gnawed sock here, a shredded paper towel there. "Buster's Puppyhood Museum," he'd call it, chuckling as he tossed another ruined thing into the trash. Once he had his shots, we started hitting the dog park a few blocks away. I'd unclip his leash, and he'd bolt, a streak of fur tearing across the grass with other pups. His energy was a force, endless, wild, and so alive. We'd stand there, hands shoved in our coat pockets against the chill, watching him tumble and play. He'd flop onto his back for belly rubs from strangers, his tongue hanging out in a lopsided grin that melted everyone around him. "He's the friendliest guy here," Jake would say, and I'd nod, feeling like we'd hit the jackpot with him. During lunch breaks at work, I'd hunch over my desk, scrolling through the flood of pictures on my phone. Buster sprawled on his bed, Buster mid-leap for a toy. I'd miss him so much it ached, counting down the minutes until I could get back to that wagging tail. Jake and I kept a running text thread, firing off updates like newscasters. He just howled at the mailman, or caught him napping with his head in the water bowl. We were those dog people, head over heels and shameless about it. But there were signs we didn't see or didn't want to. A low growl rumbled in his throat once when I nudged him off the couch, his body stiffening for a split second before he hopped down. On walks, he'd snap at his leash, teeth flashing as he tugged against it. Playtime started feeling sharper, his nips landing harder than they should have. We'd shrug it off. "He's just a puppy," we'd say, or "he'll grow out of it." We were so sure our love, plus a few basic commands, would shape him into the dog we pictured. Loyal, gentle, perfect. Those early days shimmered with hope, a bubble of bliss we thought would hold. We didn't know it was already starting to crack. Then the shift came, slow at first, then all at once. Buster wasn't a little fluff ball anymore. He'd grown into an 80-pound storm, a whirlwind of muscle and teeth that tore through our home. Mornings started with a knot in my stomach as I'd pad out of the bedroom, scanning for the latest disaster. Our leather couch, the one we'd saved up for, was a battlefield of claw marks and bite scars, stuffing poking out like white flags of surrender. The walls wore scratches like jagged tattoos, tracing his growing restlessness. But the damage wasn't the worst of it. The fear was, I'll never shake the day he bit me. I'd reach down, casual as ever, to adjust his collar. Nothing new, nothing threatening. He whirled around, eyes wild, and sank his teeth into my forearm. The pain was sharp, a hot sting that faded fast, but the betrayal lingered, heavy and cold. This was our Buster, the pup we'd cradled and cooed over, and now I flinched when he moved too close. Jake didn't make it easier. "You're not firm enough," he'd say, his voice edged with frustration as he loomed over Buster, barking commands. It only wound him up more, his hackles rising, paws pacing. Jake didn't see what I did. Hours alone with Buster while I worked from home, his growls pinning me to my chair. We clashed over it nonstop. Jake leaned hard into control, raising his voice, gripping the leash tight. I shrank back, tiptoeing around to avoid setting Buster off. Our friends faded away, visits drying up after he'd lunge or hump their legs, his snarls chasing them out the door. "You're too soft," Jake would mutter. But I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes when Buster snapped at kids in the park, his leash straining in Jake's hands. It all shattered at a dinner party we'd stupidly thought we could pull off. Buster zeroed in on Sarah's purse, ripping it apart with a fury that left leather scraps scattered across the floor. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he lifted his leg and marked the dining room rug, a bold claim right in front of our stunned guests. Jake yelled, dragging him toward the bedroom, while I stood there, rooted, watching our life crumble. After they left, apologies hanging awkward in the air, we turned on each other. "He's dangerous, Jake," I sobbed, cradling my hand where his teeth had grazed me again. "We can't keep doing this. He needs help." "He needs discipline," Jake fired back, but his voice cracked, thin and unsure. Even he couldn't dodge the truth anymore. Our home had become a cage, Buster, its unpredictable king. We stopped sharing the bed. His growls pushed Jake to the couch, but he'd snap at me if I shifted too fast. I'd lock myself in the bathroom, tears streaking my face, scrolling rehoming sites on my phone, guilt choking me. Those blue eyes still held echoes of the puppy we'd fallen for, and I couldn't let go. The breaking point hit when he bit our neighbor in the elevator, an older man who just smiled and reached to pet him. He didn't report it, thank God, but I shook for hours after. That night, Jake and I slumped on opposite ends of our ruined couch, the silence thick between us. "We need help," I said, voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, slow and heavy. Our dream had twisted into a nightmare, choking us with fear and fraying every thread that held us together. We had to fix it, for Buster, for us, for whatever was left to save. Olivia stepped into our mess like a calm in the storm. She stood in our living room, posture easy but sure, while Buster circled her, nose twitching, eyes narrow. I hovered nearby, pulse racing, ready to jump if he lunged. But he didn't, just kept his distance, wary but still. "Tell me about your routine," she said, her gaze locked on him, steady as stone. I spilled it all, how he ate before us, claimed the couch, ruled the space. She jotted notes in a worn leather book, nodding, then looked up. "He thinks he's the boss. Everything you do tells him he's right." Her words landed like a punch. She explained how his early split from his litter left him raw, missing the rough and tumble lessons that teach a pup how to bite soft, how to read limits. It clicked. His bites weren't mean, he just didn't know better. "We're rewriting this," she said, voice firm. First up, I ate before him. She had me sit at a rickety table inside of his bowl, chewing loud while he paced and whined, tail flicking. It felt absurd, like a weird performance, but she swore it set the pecking order straight. Next came the clicker, a small plastic thing that snapped with a crisp sound when he did something right, paired with a treat. We started basic: sit, stay, come. He'd cock his head, ears perked, confusion wrinkling his brow, but his brain kicked in fast. He was smart, always had been. The real test was his edge, those flashes of teeth and temper. Olivia showed me the tells: a stiff spine, a locked stare, hackles spiking. "Catch it early," she'd say, guiding me to toss a toy or call him off before it blew up. He guarded his stuff like treasure: bones, toys, even a stray sock. She walked me through, leave it, starting with junk he didn't care about, building up slow. My hands shook at first, but her steady nod kept me grounded. "Everyone's in or it flops," she warned. Jake bristled, called it too rigid, too cold. But Buster's small wins softened him. The basement timeout sparked a fight, though. Jake thought it was mean, locking him down there when he snapped. "It's not about hurt," Olivia said. "It's a reset. He calms. You breathe." Hearing him scratch and fuss killed me, but it stuck. Some days he'd unravel, lunging or growling like we'd taught him nothing. I'd slump, doubting it all, but Olivia held firm. Then came the doorway win. He'd always shoved past us, leading the charge. She made me block him, go first, make him wait. It was a wrestle, him pushing, me fumbling, but one day he sat, eyes on me, patient. I could have shouted. I felt it in myself too, shoulders back, voice steady. This wasn't just his fix, it was ours. Olivia steered us with quiet grit, showing us trust wasn't a gift. It was built, brick by brick. We were clawing our way back, and it was starting to feel real. Taming Buster felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of thorns, teetering between hope and despair with every step. Olivia was our compass, slicing through the chaos with a plan so deliberate it almost felt surgical. She didn't rush in with grand fixes. She picked apart each snarl and snap, tackling them one by one like untying knots in a tangled rope. The humping was the ugliest knot, pure embarrassment wrapped in fur. Friends couldn't cross our threshold without Buster latching onto a leg, his hips pumping away while I'd stammer apologies, cheeks burning. Olivia didn't blink. "Neutering," she said, calm as if she'd suggested a walk. I latched onto the idea like a lifeline, picturing quieter visits, but Jake bristled, arms crossed tight over his chest. "His manhood?" he scoffed, voice sharp, eyes flashing with something between pride and panic. He loved Buster, loved the wild spark in him, but even he couldn't ignore the wreckage anymore. Olivia didn't push back with heat. She sat us down on our scratched-up couch, pulled out her notebook, and laid it out. Cool, clear facts. "It's not just the humping," she said, her pen tapping the page. "It cuts aggression, eases training, settles him down." She flipped to a chart she'd sketched. Stats on neutered dogs, calmer homes. Jake frowned, jaw tight, but listened. Then his parents came over. Buster didn't waste a minute, humped his mom's leg right there in the entryway, her gasp echoing off the walls. Jake's face went red, then pale, and after they left, he slumped beside me. "Okay," he muttered, barely audible. "Let's do it." The surgery date loomed a week out, and I counted the days, imagining a home where I wouldn't cringe at the doorbell. While we waited, Olivia tossed us a curveball, sound aversion. She handed me a small air horn, the kind that shrieks like a tiny banshee. "When he starts, blast it," she said. "He'll hate it enough to stop." First try, Buster was mid-hump on a cushion when I squeezed it. The noise ripped through the room, sharp and shrill. He froze, ears flat, then glared at me like I'd betrayed him. Next time, he barked back, a deep, defiant woof as if daring the horn to try again. Olivia watched, lips twitching. "Stubborn one," she said. "We'll keep at it." But it didn't stick. He'd pause, sure, but the urge always crept back. I'd catch Jake smirking despite himself, and we'd trade a look. Our Husky was a fighter, horn or no horn. The biting, though, that was the real beast, the one that kept me up nights, tracing the faint scars on my arm. Olivia's answer was so simple, it almost felt like a trick. "Basement," she said, pointing to the door off the kitchen. 5 minutes, every time he bites or snaps. No yelling, no fuss, just walk him down. I balked, picturing his whines, those blue eyes pleading through the crack. "Cruel?" I asked, voice small. She shook her head. "It's consequence, not punishment. He learns what crosses the line." First time he nipped, my hand too close to his bowl, I grabbed his collar, marched him down the creaky stairs and shut the door. His scratches clawed at the wood, a high-pitched whimper slicing through me. I leaned against the wall, biting my lip, counting seconds. Olivia's voice rang in my head. "Consistency's the key. Give in, and he wins." 5 minutes later, I let him out, silent, steady. He sulked, but it stuck with me. Firmness wasn't mean, it was clear. Commands sharpened up fast. No more soft pleas like, "Buster, sweetie, please stop jumping." Now it was, "Down." Short, loud, cutting through his chaos. He'd freeze, ears flicking, then drop, and I'd slip him a treat quick as a heartbeat. Olivia drilled it into us. Timing was everything. 2 seconds late and he won't connect it, she'd say, clicking her own fingers like a metronome. We turned into treat machines, pockets stuffed with bits of kibble or chicken ready to reward the second he got it right. She'd set up tests, tempt him to jump, growl, lunge, then guide us through the fix. "Stand tall," she'd say, nudging my shoulders back. "He feels your nerves. Stay steady, and he will too." I'd square up, voice firm, and watch him shift, unsure but listening. Everything flipped, small, strange rules that felt like a new language. I'd eat a sandwich right in front of him, crumbs falling as he stared, tail thumping. Doorways became my turf. I'd stride through, making him wait, his nose twitching as he held back. The couch wasn't his throne anymore. He'd sit, eyes locked on me, until I patted the cushion. "It's not random," Olivia said one afternoon, perched on a stool while Buster gnawed a toy. "He needs to know where he fits. This gives him that." 2 weeks in, I saw it click. He'd start to leap on the counter, paws lifting, then stop, drop to a sit, head tilted, waiting for the treat. My breath caught every time, a tiny spark of pride flaring up. Jake came around slow. He'd grumble about the rules at first, rolling his eyes when I'd insist he eat before Buster too. But he saw it, the growls fading, the calm settling in, and started pitching in. He'd take the leash for walks, voice steady with a heel that actually worked. Olivia nodded at us one day, arms crossed. "Dogs need certainty. You two on the same page? That's his rock." We synced up, a quiet rhythm building. Same words, same moves, same calm. It wasn't dominance like Jake first thought. It was trust, steady as a heartbeat. The rough days still hit hard. Some mornings, Buster acted like he'd forgotten it all, snapping at my hand, lunging at shadows. I'd slump on the couch, hands in my hair, wondering if we'd ever get there. Olivia never flinched. "It's a wave, not a line," she'd say, voice soft but sure. "He's learning, same as you. Keep going." She'd tweak things. More treats one day, a longer basement break the next, always adjusting, never doubting. I clung to that, her quiet faith pulling me through. The clicker turned into my shadow, that sharp little snap bridging the gap between us. I'd click when he sat, when he stayed, when he looked at me instead of charging. It was clean, precise. No yelling, no mess. He'd perk up at the sound, eyes bright like he was piecing it together. Good things come when I listen. Slowly, that wild, scary dog, the one who'd pinned me in corners, started shifting. He'd pause, think, choose. I'd watch him, treat in hand, and feel the air change. Less fear, more hope. The shift wasn't loud or sudden. It crept in, soft as dawn. One morning, Buster sat by his bowl, quiet, no barking, no shoving. I poured his kibble, said okay, and he ate. Calm, controlled. My chest tightened, pride swelling up like a tide. Then my parents called. They were coming, bringing my niece, Emma, all 5 years of her fearless energy. Before I'd have spiraled, picturing Buster's teeth near her tiny hands. Now I exhaled. We'd been steady with Olivia's ways, clicks, treats, basement breaks, and it showed. They arrived on a crisp afternoon, leaves crunching outside. Buster stayed on his bed, ears up but still, as the door swung open. I held my breath, hand hovering near his collar. Emma zeroed in, her pigtails bouncing. "He's so fluffy," she squealed, reaching out. Old me would have yanked her back, heart pounding. New me knelt beside her, voice low. "Slow, like this," I said, guiding her hand. Buster let her pet him, his tail thumping soft against the floor, body loose. I blinked hard, tears prickling. My once wild dog, gentle with a kid. Jake felt it too. Our fights fizzled out, replaced by quick nods over Buster's wins. "Good sit, bud," he'd say, tossing a treat, and I'd grin. We were a unit again, not just scrapping by. Olivia dropped by less, but one visit, she leaned against the wall, watching him wait at the door, walk slack on his leash, drop at a word. "You've nailed it," she said, her smile warm. I beamed, chest light. Then she hit us with it. "Shelter's got a husky pup, Luna. 4 months, abandoned. Buster could guide her." I froze, breath catching. Months back, another dog would have been a pipe dream, 2 terrors instead of 1. But Buster sat there steady, those blue eyes calm. "Fostering?" I asked. Olivia nodded. "He's ready. So are you." We met Luna the next day, small, skittish, her fur a soft gray. Buster sniffed her, slow and careful. No hackles, no snarl. He nudged her toward his bed, then flopped down like a big brother showing off. Outside, he'd romp with her, nipping gentle when she got too wild, teaching her the rules we'd fought to learn. Jake slid his arm around me, the grass cool under our feet. "Thought we'd lose him once," he said, voice low. I nodded, throat tight. We'd clawed through the dark, Olivia's push, our grit, and found something solid. Buster wasn't just ours anymore. He was proof we could fix what broke. Thank you for watching. If you like the story, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.